to another intensive care at home live stream. My name is Patrik Hutzel and I'm the founder of Intensive Care at Home. And in today's live stream, I want to talk to you about should my dad go home with intensive care at home? Should he stay in ICU or should he go to LTAC? And I want to dive very deep into this question today. And obviously this question is all about somebody that's in intensive care. Your dad, could be your mom, could be your brother, could be your sister, could be your spouse, whoever it is that we're referring to. If they're in intensive care long term, ventilated with a tracheostomy. There are other clients as well, or patients in intensive care that could go home as well. Even if they don't have a tracheostomy, for example, they might have BiPAP or C-Pap ventilation needs, and so forth. Or they might have other medical complexities, not necessarily ventilated, but they might have seizures that need airway management when those seizures occur, and so forth. But I'll come to that in a moment. Before I go into the topic, you may wonder what makes me qualified to talk about this topic. So just very briefly about myself. I am a critical care nurse by background. I have worked in intensive care for over 20 years and in 3 different countries. A while ago, I was part of intensive care at home in Germany over 20 years ago, and I was part of setting up intensive care at home in Germany. And then in 2012, 2013, I started setting it up here in Australia. I should say I started it successfully. We have a growing and established company now where we look after many long-term ventilated patients at home instead of them staying in intensive care long-term. So that's a little bit of background. I have also worked in intensive care as a nurse unit manager for over 5 years. We're also running intensive care hotline, where we are providing a consulting and advocacy service for families in intensive care. And, we talk to families in intensive care all over the world every day. So we have massive insights into intensive care and also obviously what's happening with intensive care at home. And I will talk to you about that in a moment. So let's focus on today's topic. Should my dad go home with intensive care at home? Should he stay in ICU or go to LTAC? Now, again, this is just a hypothetical question, but because we're getting this question pretty much every day of the week, this is why I wanted to make a video about it today in a live stream where you can ask questions. And sorry, yes, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please type them into your chat pad so I can answer them, of course. That's what this is all about, answering your questions. Instead of, can your dad go home? I could have also said, can your mom go home? Can your brother go home? Can your sister go home? Can your child go home? Your daughter, your son? Can your wife, your husband go home? So, we're getting this question every day of the week from all over the world, really. But obviously, at the moment, we are an Australian-based company, Intensive Care at Home, and we're providing services mainly in Australia, predominantly Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, but we're also going to Adelaide and Perth. But we also have a lot of inquiries from the US, and I want to address our US audience as we go along in today's video. So when someone is in intensive care long-term, and when I say long-term, I'm probably referring to anything that's sort of above the 6 to 8 week mark. They have a tracheostomy, they are on a ventilator, and they're struggling getting off the ventilator. That is probably when intensive care at home comes in, where we can help taking your loved one home, right? There's very few prerequisites, really. That one of the prerequisites is that someone needs to be hemodynamically stable, meaning they shouldn't be on inotropes or vasopressors. In some instances that can be done at home as well, but if someone is on vasopressors or inotropes on a continuous basis, it might actually be too risky take them home. But other than that, anything is possible at home. I argue we are running like a small ICU in the community. That's what we do, right? And we're helping ICUs to free up their beds, but more importantly, we're helping patients and their families to live a much better quality of life. I mean, if you're on this call today, you might have a loved one in ICU, and you might be looking for solutions because you realize your loved one doesn't have any quality of life, and you realize you don't have any quality of life because you're probably commuting between home and hospital to spend any spare minute you have with your loved one. It's a pretty scary experience. I can understand that. So of course you're looking for solutions. Of course you're looking at, okay, how can I go home, or how can I get my loved one home if they can't come off the ventilator? And you realize by now, if they can't come off the ventilator, if they need to keep the tracheostomy, you have a big dilemma, because you can see the challenges from an intensive care perspective that they can't go anywhere else. If you are watching this and you are in the US, yes, the ICU might have suggested to you to take your loved one to LTAC, but if you've done any research about LTAC, you would find very negative feedback about LTAC, and you would realize that the 1-to-1 nurse-to-patient ratio, or sometimes 1-to-2 nurse-to-patient ratio in ICU, will quickly deteriorate to a 1-to-4, 1-to-5, maybe 1-to-10 overnight. So LTAC is not really a solution that is a sustainable solution. So you would realize that you're in a real pickle here, in a real dilemma. On the one hand, you've got ICU trying to force you out. On the other hand, that LTAC is not the solution. In other countries, like in Australia here or in the UK, it's different. There are no LTACs, and you can look at solutions like intensive care at home pretty quickly. Well, you should do the same in America, don't get me wrong, but you do have this intermediate step in America with LTACs that, from my perspective, are making things worse and not making it better. But you should be looking at solutions like intensive care at home pretty quickly, I believe. But I also want to make one thing clear. We have inquiries sometimes where families come to us and they say, look, my mom, my dad, my spouse, whoever has been in ICU for 3 days, can we take them home? Now, my argument on that level is, after 3 days, it is way too early, because there your goal should be to deal with whatever issue is at hand, get dealt with, get out of ICU, get to a hospital ward, get to a hospital floor, and then go home, right? ICU should be something that is short, that is temporary. The bottom line is this, and the challenge is this, though, that more and more people in ICU are there long term. More and more people in ICU need a tracheostomy, especially now with the prevalence of COVID. There are many patients in ICU that had COVID ARDS and now end up with a tracheostomy, and families are looking for solutions. So it is predominantly, intensive care at home is predominantly for someone that is in intensive care, has been in intensive care for many weeks, can't come off a ventilator, has difficulties weaning off a ventilator. And there's often also the psychological aspect. People are scared, patients are scared. There's high staff turnover in ICU. There is some consistency, but probably not enough consistency. There is a disturbed day and night rhythm. There is depression. There can be loneliness. There's all these issues that can be much better dealt with at home, because a part of what we do, when we start with someone at home, we're trying to create a stable team, of course. You wouldn't have people coming and going ideally, and you'd have a more stable team. Don't get me wrong, this can take time as well, especially in the early days when we're starting out. There are some trial and errors around staff. We want to find the right staff for you, of course, but excuse me, but that is often not an overnight event. It takes a little bit of time, finding staff, modeling them to your environment, modeling them to what you would like, modeling them to what your loved one would like in terms of routine, You know, it's not like in ICU where every morning at 4 o'clock someone gets a bed bath, you know, because that's what the policies and procedures are in ICU. You know, a home care environment is much more geared towards you, towards your loved one's routine. It's not about us, it's about you getting what you want out of this, you know. And I also understand it can be pretty daunting. On the one hand, I know if you're watching this or listening to this, if you've come to this, I know you're looking for a solution. But I also know this can be pretty daunting too. And you probably have all these questions running through your head. How does this even work? What does it look like? You know, can you just deliver services at home that my loved one is now getting in intensive care? And the answer is pretty much yes. But obviously things need to be set up correctly, whether that's equipment, you know, whether that's staff, you know, looking at what would you do in an emergency at home, you know, how would the staff react, what are the staff's qualifications, what's your medical backup. So there's all these questions that I know you're asking and rightfully asking so, you know, but again, it is all doable. We've been doing this now for close to 10 years, and prior to that, you know, I've been doing it in Germany way back when. So, you know, it's all possible. And just because ICUs are, it's still not mainstream. You know, they might be a little bit opposed, or they might be rolling their eyes when they even hear about it. That should not stop you from considering this option. You know, it can be all set up. So it starts from, once you're clear on that you want to go home, it starts from setting up the home care environment around, you know, you need a hospital bed, you probably need a hoist, whether that's a seating hoist or a portable hoist, hoists also known as lifting machines, right? You need ventilators, you need suction machines, you need monitors, and you always need 2 of each to have backup, right? You will need emergency equipment such as a resuscitation bag, spare tracheostomies, tracheostomy dilators. You know, you need the medication at home that your loved one needs, you know, to go home. They often need a PEG tube. Sometimes they are okay with a nasogastric tube, but most of the time they do need a PEG tube. For children, it's slightly different, because I know some of you that might be watching have their kids in ICU long term. You know, and part of what we do, we're looking after adults and children at home. And we've looked even after toddlers at home. We've looked after any ages. The youngest one we've had was probably 18 months, all the way up to people in their 80s or in their 90s. So all age brackets fit the criteria really, if they otherwise would stay in intensive care long term. So coming back to what needs to be set up at home. So as I mentioned, hospital bed, hoist or lifting machines, sometimes a ceiling lifting machine or a ceiling hoist, 2 ventilators, 2 suction machines, 2 monitors, nebulizer, emergency equipment such as spare tracheostomies, resuscitation bag, Guedel airways, nasopharyngeal airways in some situations, tracheal dilators, and the list goes on. Again, this might sound daunting to you, but again, this is where we come in, where we set this all up for you or help you in setting it up. Some of you might think, you know, what if I only live in a small apartment? You don't live in a house, you live, you know, in a city area, you live in a small apartment. Look, from my experience, you don't need a lot of space. There's a little bit of space that you need, but we've done work in really small apartments, and it's all doable, all possible. You know, you don't need to necessarily remodel your house. Now, don't get me wrong, some families that we work with have remodeled their houses, right? And they've almost, you know, built like an adjacent flat just to care for their loved one, almost set it up like a hospital room. Some families have done that, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite depending on your circumstances. You know, also depends on what timelines are you looking at. You know, are you looking at going home temporarily? You know, is it realistic that once you've gone home, your loved one can be weaned off the ventilator in a short period of time? You know, It depends on a number of things what you need to do when you want to go home. But my advice is to not overcomplicate. And again, because we've been doing this for a long time, for me it's easy to say do not overcomplicate, because I know you've got all these questions that are going around in your head. On the one hand, it's easy to do it. On the other hand, it's not simple. It's just a case of putting in place what we know needs to be put in place. It's about assessing the environment. It's about having the right people work with you. It's critical that the right people show up at your doorstep. And again, there's a little bit of a process. I would never promise you that we have the right team ready for you from day one, because you got to get to know people. We got to get to know you. It's a bit of a two-way street, of course. But the most important thing is from a safety aspect. We exclusively work with intensive care nurses with a minimum of 2 years intensive care experience, which should give you peace of mind that, we have the expertise to look after your loved one. And if it's not the right fit on a personal level, that's something we can work on, of course. That's just what's that these processes take a little bit of time, of course. So then I should probably also talk around funding. I should talk around how is it financed. None of our clients are out of pocket. Don't get me wrong, we had the odd private client, but as of today, 99% of our clients are not out of pockets. It's government funded. Here in Australia, it's predominantly funded through the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But we will also get funding through the TAC, the Transport and Accident Commission in Victoria, getting funding through the DVA, the Department of Veteran Affairs. We sometimes get funding through the hospitals directly. So I do believe, I was actually talking to a prospect on the phone this morning, and I strongly believe your biggest problem is not funding. Your biggest problem is to find someone that can do intensive care at home properly, thoroughly, and safely. I do believe that is the bigger problem. Yes, funding can be a challenge too, but we wouldn't be in business if our clients wouldn't receive the funding. So I'd encourage you to not worry too much about the funding. Focus more on your end goal, which is to get your loved one home. Okay, also, you got to keep in mind, irrespective of your desire to take your loved one home, there is a business model in there. So whilst I don't want to focus on business models today, but I do need you to understand the mechanics. The mechanics are that an intensive care bed costs $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day. It doesn't matter whether it's here, whether it's in the UK or in America or in Canada. It's around $5,000 to $6,000 per bed day, right? We can slash that cost by around half. Bang. So here is the business model. It's a win-win for everyone. Well, we're cutting the cost of an intensive care bed by half, roughly. We're freeing up an ICU bed that is in high demand, right? Especially now with COVID, but even without COVID, ICU beds are in high demand. We can almost stop there and say, well, it's already a win-win for everyone. Okay, so it is really important that you understand the mechanics and the business models behind it. I also want to then next focus on, if you are in Australia and NDIS is an option for you, you should absolutely contact us, because we can help you with support coordination, specialist support coordination. But even if you're in America, you should absolutely contact us, because we can set you up with some organizations in the US that can help you. At the very least, we can guide you, what to do next, because it's very similar in the US at the end of the day than it is here. At the end of the day, everyone that's researching this comes with the same goal. They want to take their loved ones home from ICU, or if you're in America, you might want to take your loved one home from LTAC, depending on your circumstances. So, but the funding is not as difficult as you think it is. And again, we can help with that. Focus on your end goal and break it down into manageable steps. So then I also want to talk about, what does it look like at home? So once your loved one is at home, it is really all about the routine that you and your loved one wants, I mean, as you know, in ICU, there's no quality of life, whereas at home, you're surrounded by your family, you can structure your day the way you want it or your loved one wants it. We have a lot of clients that go out every day, even though, they might be in a wheelchair. It's all doable. Most of our clients would never, ever in a million years want to go back to ICU, because they have a much better quality of life at home. And that's a no-brainer. So, it really all comes down to your preferences, what you want to do at home. We have some clients, for example, we have a client, this client is working from home or is even going to university to work from there. Nothing is impossible, I argue. We have clients that go to school, even on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. There's nothing that can't be done at home. The ICU environment is really limiting you. Some of you might have experienced that you have loved ones in ICU and they're not getting physical therapy, they're not getting physiotherapy, they're not getting mobilized. And now here I am talking about our clients going out. Okay, there's a big contrast there, but I do believe you need to be aware of that once you're out of this inhibiting and limiting ICU environment, that anything is possible at home, and you should be focusing on what you can do, not what you can't do, because that's probably what you're hearing in ICU at the moment. Or, that can't be done, and, we've got to do this and we've got to do that. And it's more of a, at home you're looking for a quote unquote can-do attitude, right? That's really important, a can-do attitude, because that's what's often missing in ICU. There's not a can-do attitude, and they want to continue talking about end of life. They want to continue talking about that it's quote unquote not in your loved one's interest to go home. It's quote unquote not in their interest to even live. You've probably heard it all before. It's probably one of the reasons why you're here. You've heard the negativity, whereas we are at intensive care at home giving you what I believe is a very positive alternative. And it's also a positive alternative for the ICU, because they can free up their beds and they can cut costs. Again, it's a win for everyone. But as I keep talking, I would be also curious what questions you have. Type them into your chat, but if you have any, if not, I'll just keep talking. It's all about possibilities at home, whether it's ventilation weaning, whether it's about, living a better quality of life. Simple things like sitting in the sun, you can't do that in the ICU. Getting some fresh air, things that a healthy person takes for granted. And once you're out of the ICU environment, you can do all of that. Also, other things that we've done with clients, for example, is we've gone on trips, we've gone traveling. We've gone on a plane with someone that's on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. It's all doable. It needs to be organized properly, of course, but it's all doable. So you should absolutely research this area if you are interested in taking your loved one home. And I know why it looks daunting. It's absolutely doable, and it's also the future of healthcare. It's the future of healthcare. Nobody wants to be in a hospital. Nobody wanted to be in a hospital pre-COVID, let alone now that COVID is still running rampant. Nobody wants to be in hospital with ICUs, full of COVID. And also now is probably also a good time, for ICU nurses to leave the ICU, because they are tired, they're exhausted. The home care gives them the opportunity to work in a different environment and still use their ICU skills, in a much nicer environment. It's one-on-one nursing care. It's about building relationships with clients. It's about getting to know your needs and then tailoring the service around your needs, right? So, again, I also want to quickly talk about LTAC. and I want to quickly hone in on our US audience for a minute. One of the challenges in ICUs in America is simply that ICUs offer limited physical therapy, and then they're pushed to LTAC to get physical therapy. Yes, they might get physical therapy in LTAC, but then they miss out on the specialist skills such as ventilation, tracheostomy, and then you're going one step backwards, right? That's one of the biggest challenges for LTAC, that they just simply, they've been designed to save money, but not for clinical need. Whereas in other countries like Australia or the UK or also in Canada, where there's no LTACs, patients either stay in intensive care long term, or they then go home with a service like intensive care at home, but there's no intermediate step. And neither should there be an intermediate step, because again, ventilation, tracheostomy, BiPAP, C-Pap with a mask even requires the skill of an intensive care nurse, nothing less than that. And that's what you'll get with intensive care at home. Now, I've got around 5 or 10 minutes left for today's video. Again, I would be very curious to know what questions to ask, because if there are no questions, I'll keep talking, but I'll slowly wrap it up. Please type in your questions into the chat pad. Again, I'd be really curious to find out what else are you waiting for that I haven't mentioned yet. What questions do you have? I probably should also talk quickly about the medical backup. Whilst we are a nursing service predominantly, there's always a doctor we are working with, of course. There needs to be medical oversight of any nursing care at home. So there's a number of doctors that we're working with. There's also sometimes, the doctors at the hospital that we're working with, predominantly actually, where we can call the hospital 24 hours a day if we have any questions, if we need to escalate any of the care. That's how we roll, generally speaking. So there's always someone overseeing. I should also talk quickly about what is a real win. A real win really is all shifts are filled at home, and if you are or your loved one is staying at home predictably, because that's what it comes down to. It comes down to predictability. Comes down to making sure that we can deliver on our promises, which is to keep our clients at home. Only then is it a win-win situation. Right, so please don't be shy. Please don't be shy and type in your questions into the chat, but I'd love to answer them. You can find a lot of information and case studies on our website, intensivecareathome.com. But I would really encourage you to ask questions here. Here is T-Bro. How can you convince the hospital to allow your loved one to stay in ICU? That is a great question. T-Bro, can you just let me know, where are you? Where is your location? Are you in the US? Are you in Australia? Are you in the UK? Just tell me your location, because it depends a little bit on which country you're in. And while I'm waiting for your answer, T-Bro, I've got a question here from Helene. Hi, Helene. Does a CPAP help blow out carbon dioxide out of patients' lungs? Yes, it does. Yes, Helene, it does. A lot of patients that have sleep apnea have CPAP. For that very reason, it helps them to blow off CO2. So T-Bro, you're in the US. Okay, great question. So that's a really great question, especially for our US audience. How can you convince the hospital to allow your loved one to stay in ICU? Okay, so this is what we're doing with our other service, intensive care hotline, where we provide consulting and advocacy for families in intensive care. We're talking to a lot of ICUs almost every day in the US and doing that very advocacy. So one ways to convince them is, as I mentioned to you, not having ICU nurses in LTAC, which is a big no-no in and of itself. Number two, if the ICU is trying to force you to go to LTAC, in some situations I have seen patients or families being asked to go to LTAC 3 hours away from home. That is insanity. I have even seen people being transferred to LTAC in another state, right? For example, I know a lot of people in Florida have been asked to go to Georgia to LTAC. That is insanity in my mind. You know, I mean, how can someone get better without their family around? That's insanity. So you got to look at the location. You got to look at the reviews of the LTAC, right? So, you know, if they want to send you to an LTAC, look up the online reviews. Chances are those online reviews are pretty poor. You can then go back to the discharging hospital and can say, look, these are the reviews. I'm not happy. Another way to manage this is for you to look at the LTACs they're suggesting. Have a look for yourself, and you'll probably go, there's no way that I'm going to let my loved one go to this place, right? Other reasons to convince the hospital to stay in ICU instead of going to LTAC are things like simply on a medical ground. And that's where we can come in as advocates. You know, we can help you with interpreting clinical information. We can help you with talking to the doctors, talking to the nurses, look at medical records and say, hang on a second, this person is nowhere near ready to go to LTAC. Because this is another thing we're seeing all the time, that patients are being pushed out too early out of ICU into LTAC in America because ICUs need beds, families are uninformed, and they just let them walk all over them, you know. Yeah, look at the reviews in LTACs that they are recommending, yes, but look, I haven't come across many LTACs that have good reviews. And here is another thing, T-Bro. If someone is in ICU, they are at their most vulnerable. Okay, I don't think many people in this world are more vulnerable than people that are a patient in ICU. Now, to me, again, it screams insanity to let someone in a vulnerable condition go to another facility. That is just unheard of, because someone in such a vulnerable condition needs a team that knows them. Now, if someone from ICU goes to LTAC, they're losing their treating team. They are with another treating team, so they got to get to know them from scratch, you know, and it's just not conducive for a good recovery. Just not conducive. LTACs have been built to save money. They have not been built for clinical need, right? Here is another pitfall, T-Bro, in this situation. So let's just say your loved one goes to LTAC. Chances of them having a complication and needing ICU again are pretty high. So what I've seen over the years is this, T-Bro. So someone goes to LTAC, within a couple of days they deteriorate and they need to go back to ICU again. And depending on the LTAC's location, they then end up in another ICU. So within a few days, they would have been to 3 facilities. That is insanity for someone that is on a ventilator, tracheostomy, is unstable. That is absolute insanity. So, you know, but often what we do, T-Bro, from our end is we often look at interpreting the clinical information, and we often find information where we say to the ICU, hang on a second, you can't treat that at LTAC. This patient needs to stay here. You know, that's where we can come in. I hope that helps. Exactly, they could end up, I have seen ICU patients go to LTAC, within a couple of days they deteriorate and they need to go back to ICU, and then the ICU that discharged them don't have a bed available, so then they go to another ICU, and within a few days they've been to 3 places in such a vulnerable condition. That's insanity, T-Bro. You know, someone in such a critical condition needs a stable team to take them from where they are to where they need to go. They don't need to go from place to place to place. That's literally killing people. You're welcome. You're welcome. So, okay, so then, Helen, you had another question. What about patient being ICU hospital transfers to a different ICU? Yeah, look, that happens, of course, you know, and that's something we help families with as well. Help them to go to another ICU if, you know, for whatever reason they need to change location to be close to families, or they need to change ICUs because you know, someone is unhappy, treatment, you know, that can happen too. That can happen too. But unless there is a major reason for it, I would advise against it, because for the very reasons that I just mentioned there to T-Bro, where I said you don't want to be going from place to place. It's just not conducive for someone that is so vulnerable, you know. But yeah, we have helped families to source other ICUs if needed, for sure. Are there any other questions before I wrap this up? I have another 5 minutes, but then I need to wrap this up, unfortunately. Please keep your questions coming before I wrap this up. There will be another live stream next Saturday night for you guys in the US. It's Sunday morning here in Australia. There will be another live stream next week, possibly about hypoxic brain injury. So look out for that one. Do you have any other questions before I wrap this up? So yeah, look out for another one next Saturday night for you guys in the US, Sunday morning here in Australia. I will do another one, and I will keep going for the Christmas period as well. For ICU care at home, T-Bro, you have a list of good providers. That's a great question, T-Bro. I have 2 providers in the US, maybe 3. One of them is, I understand that you're in America. So one of them is, check out Bayada. They're called Bayada, BAYADA.com. Have a look at bayada.com. There is a guy, it depends on your location. I don't know where you are. There is a provider in South Carolina, and I will need to look it up. Bayada.com. Yes, that's the one. That's how you spell it. Yeah, look that one up. There is another provider in New York that doesn't have a website, but I could set you up with them depending on where you are. They don't have a website, but they seem to know what they're doing. And then there's another provider in South Carolina that I know has helped someone not too long ago. T-Bro, you're in California. In California, I do believe your best bet is Bayada, because the other 2 providers that I know are, one is in South Carolina and one is in New York. Your best bet in New York, your best bet in California is Bayada. I don't know anybody else on the West Coast. And then Mama got a question. Loved one had a bad reaction to COVID antibodies. His body went to a cytokine storm. Hang on. Now the question disappeared. His body went to a cytokine storm, been off vent and off sedation for a week now. He's stable but in a coma still. Have you ever seen this? Oh yeah, for sure. Seen this many times because ICU is very unpredictable. Very unpredictable, you know, being off ventilation, going back on ventilation. Hang on, I just need to look at being off vent and off sedation. He's stable but in a coma still. Oh yeah. So Mama tried. So what can happen when someone gets out of an induced coma? It can sometimes take many days, sometimes weeks to wake up. The first question that you need to ask is the brain intact? Have they done, for example, a CT brain scan? Have they done an MRI brain scan? Because if someone is not waking up, the first thing you need to ask for is, has there been a brain injury while they were in a coma? Have they had a stroke? Have they had seizures? That's the first question you need to ask. And they should be ruling that out by doing either an EEG or a CT or an MRI scan of the brain, and then reassess. Other things that could happen in a situation like this Mama tried is they are in kidney failure, they're in liver failure, and the sedatives are not getting metabolized, meaning they're still floating around in the body. They're being metabolized slowly. They're more or less, quote unquote, hung over from the sedatives, which is why they're not waking up. So seen this many times. It's the number one question we're getting at intensivecarehotline.com. The number one question we're getting at intensivecarehotline.com is, how long does it take to wake up after an induced coma? That's the number one question we're getting. And that ties right in with your question. So if you go to our website, intensivecarehotline.com, type in how long does it take to wake up after an induced coma, you will get answers there as well. Some of it also depends on what sedatives your loved one has been on. Okay, have they been on it for a long time? Have they been on it, have they been paralyzed? There's a whole lot of questions around that topic. Guys, I really appreciate your support and I really appreciate you coming onto this call. I do need to wrap this up now. Now, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel for updates for families in intensive care and also for live streams. Click the notification bell. Comment below after this video what you want to see next, and I will get back to you. In a response. You're welcome, T-Bro, and thank you for your questions. Also, check out intensivecareathome.com. Check out intensivecarehotline.com, which is our advocacy service for families in intensive care, where we help you one-on-one over the phone or via email at intensivecarehotline.com. Thank you so much again for all your support, and I talk to you next week. I wish you and your families all the very best. If I don't talk to you before Christmas, I wish you and your families a Merry Christmas, and may your loved ones recover as quickly as possible. Stay strong and take care. Thank you so much.